Welcome to the latest edition of The Innabooters, a podcast designed to find out more about people who are born, bred, live, work, eat, sleep, rave, repeat here in the Aberdeen postcode. And it's not just about people who come from here, it's about people who have come to here. The podcasts are brought to you by ifb.net, and my name is Graeme Gordon. I'm going to be your host for the next 15 or 20 minutes with our guest today, Bob Sanguinetti. Bob, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Good to see you. So with all our guests, we get you to tell us who you are, what you do, and who you do it for. So over to you.
Well, my name is Bob Sanguinetti, and I am the CEO of Port of Aberdeen, and I've been here in Aberdeen now for 2.5 years. I work clearly for the port. The port is a trust port, which means it's neither privately owned nor publicly funded. We're set up by an Act of Parliament, and we're an independent entity. And uniquely, we don't have shareholders, we have stakeholders, and our stakeholders are wide and varied, ranging from our own employees in the port, the employees of companies who do their business in the port, and the wider community. So Aberdeen City Council, the Shire Council, and indeed national governments, because we're quite a strategic asset with a prominent role in not just in the energy sector, but more widely across transport.
And thank you for that. And since you've been in post, you've done a great job at promoting, moving from rebranding, I suppose, and re-imaging the to me, as a born and bred Aberdonian, Aberdeen Harbour, and it's now the Port of Aberdeen. But you've brought much more than that, and just a name change. You're promoting the port as much more of that infrastructure asset for the Northeast in the UK. And tell us about that background to the profits from the port and what you generate go back into that infrastructure, and that's been quite a key part of your role recently.
That's absolutely right. I'd say that the port has been in transition for a period. We live in exciting times. The main activity in the port is energy, supporting the offshore sector, and that's oil and gas, fossil fuels today and in the past, but very much in transition now, moving towards renewables. So I would say that we're at a pivotal point, both in terms of time and in terms of geography. And why do I say that? Well, as the Port of Aberdeen is a key logistical hub, and it's a pivot point between the wet end and the dry end of the energy sector in the northeast of Scotland, and we're right at the heart of it. That's the geography, and that applies equally to oil and gas, as we've seen for the last 50 years, and as we're now beginning to see with increasing clarity over the next 50 years, as we look at, in particular, offshore wind off the coast of the northeast coast of Scotland. Our geography is ideal, and in terms of timelines, I think your audience will know exactly where we are with regards to transition and how we deal with climate change and how we make this a better place for all of us. And as a trust port, as you rightly point out, all the money we generate goes back into the business, or we make donations to charities and support our community where we can. But our mantra as a trust port is to be custodians of the port. So we're holding the baton effectively, and to hand over the port to our successors in a better state than we inherited it ourselves, and that applies as collectively as a team, and it applies individually. And I see very much my role as doing just that. So I was lucky enough to come up to Aberdeen 2.5 years ago. I think my sights had been set on Aberdeen a number of years before that, when I was invited by my predecessor to speak to a gathering of stakeholders, and my chosen subject was the important role that I thought Port of Aberdeen, or Aberdeen Harbour Board as it was then, had to play in the whole energy transition piece and in decarbonising shipping. Little did I know when I said those words 5 years ago that I was talking myself into the role. But here we are now, and that's exactly what we're doing.
It's an amazing story, and we'll get to that, your background and what's brought you here into Aberdeen. But I think I've heard you say, or summarise, or I may summarise here, that you've got a 360 view on the port. It's not just looking out to sea; you're looking back into the land that you're occupying as well. And I mean, I remember as a young man, as a kid, seeing the fishing boats, side by side, just the full width of the harbour at the bottom of Market Street. Now that's changed dynamic now, and now with the South Harbour, you've game changed again with the port. You're now looking at the future and investing in that. So that 360 view and what you're doing and what your team are doing is very much progressive and moving forward now.
I agree, and I think it's really important as a trust port to have that 360 perspective. We are very much the Aberdeen's port, as well as being Port of Aberdeen as a trust port. We are focused on the future whilst drawing on the huge strength and rich heritage that we enjoy as an entity that's been doing business for almost 900 years. We're also quite unique in being so close geographically to the city. So we feel like we're an integral part of the city. So when we're looking at our net zero strategy and how we reduce emissions, particularly important because clearly we're so close to the city centre and areas of the population. So we see it as an obligation to work very closely with the community to create a better place. And your reference to South Harbour, the diversification that allows us now to engage in. So we look much more widely than just the energy sector. We look at general cargo. We're clearly supporting and continue supporting the lifeline ferries to Orkney and Shetland. And of course, we now have sort of allowed a say in the cruise community because we can accommodate ships that are much bigger, much deeper, and carry many more passengers than those that we've been used to seeing in Aberdeen in the past.
Mm-hmm. I think that uniqueness that you mentioned there, that there are very few cities I've been in that has a working port the way that we have it, not a marina, but an industrial port right in the centre of it, that just about every citizen in Aberdeen has seen at least once a week as you drive through the city. It's a very visual impact. So, I mean, it's a real visual impact. And when it's busy, it's great for you. It's great for us. You see that bustle there. I mean, and you're within touching distance. I know you're not within touching distance, but as you drive past, you're within touching distance with these great big ships. It's really an impactful thing to see. Can I ask you how you've got here? Tell us Bob's story. That you've given us that summary of the last 3 years, but there's a whole bit happened before there. Where did you start with this affinity with maritime?
Well, that goes back several decades. I won't reveal my age, but I grew up in Gibraltar. I was born and raised in Gibraltar, and at the time the border with Spain was closed. And for those in the audience who are not familiar with Gibraltar, you will recognise the profile of the rock. That's pretty much Gibraltar. It's 2.5 square miles big. Most of it is taken up by a big lump of limestone, so there isn't much space to live and work and move around in. And with a population of, in those days, about 25,000 people, and a very strong UK military presence. So I grew up in a very small place, but one that was crucially placed strategically to support the shipping community, sitting as it does at the crossroads between the Atlantic on one side and the Mediterranean Sea on the other. So very busy with commercial ships going through, and very busy in those days with Royal Navy ships coming in the days when the Royal Navy fleet was much bigger than it is today. So I suppose I grew up with wanderlust and desperate to explore the world and get away from Gibraltar, having been closed up in Gibraltar for the first 16, 17 years of my life. and having spent most of the first 16 years of my life either in or on the water. And I made the connection between Royal Navy ships coming and going and the ability to go and see the world and the adventure that a career in the Royal Navy would offer. And that's exactly what I do. So I was lucky enough to be sponsored through university by the Navy, and then I spent the next 2.5 decades pretty much in the Navy. Half of that on board ships at sea, doing very exciting things and going to lots of very interesting, fascinating places around the world. So that brought me to about 10 years ago, and then I was lucky enough to be able to leave the Navy and go back to Gibraltar, which I'd never thought I would do in a professional capacity, but go back to Gibraltar to head up the Gibraltar Port Authority. I did that for 4 years. Again, a fantastic time that we had out in Gibraltar, both professionally and personally. Was able to give the port a more commercial focus. I spent a lot of time doing stakeholder engagement, reaching out to customers, to clients, to try and better understand their needs so that we could provide more and better services to the ships calling at Gibraltar. Did that for 4 years, and then came back to the UK, staying in the shipping world, and again, lucky enough to head up the UK Chamber of Shipping, so the representative body for shipping in the UK. That led to another fascinating 3 years during really, really interesting and demanding times, which included COVID, of course, and the impact that had on seafarers all over the world. We recall our own experiences of COVID, quite challenging. Periods of isolation, periods of not being able to see our loved ones, not being able to go be out and about as freely as we can now. I think sometimes it was lost on most people that actually there were hundreds of thousands of seafarers out there working day in, day out, keeping the world running, keeping goods, keeping food moving around the globe, and often not knowing when or how they'd be able to get off their ships if they were on the ships and go home, or travel from home onto their ships because of the restrictions on traveling. So fascinating time dealing with COVID, but also dealing with security incidents around the world, raising the profile of shipping to attract the best people into what is a fascinating and really, really important sector. And of course, dealing with the impact on the environment and how to minimize emissions. And that's something that I brought with me up here to Aberdeen. And that's where my journey ends outside of Aberdeen, and where my fascination and relationship with the city and the region started in September of 2021. So a rather long answer to your good question.
No, very interesting as well. There's a couple of pieces I'd like to circle back on in there. You talked about wanderlust in terms of it was a very natural progression to be comfortable and familiar with the sea, and seeing these great big ships coming in and out and going off to exotic or far off destinations from being in a very small place. I mean, Aberdeen's very akin to that. It's quite a small city, but we've got so many international travellers who've gone off. We've been very lucky that instead of it being the Royal Navy, we've had oil and gas or energy that's taking many people abroad. When you moved into that Navy role, if you don't mind me asking, did you always have something? Were you always adventurous? Were you always looking to gain? What were you looking to gain from that, as well as travel? Did it bring out other disciplines to you in terms of where you were looking to next? How did it discipline you? Because I have friends who are in the forces or have been in the forces, and they always talk about discipline, but what they mean by that is organisation and completion. And it's something that every business person craves, is to be organised and to be a completer. So how did the Navy impact you when you got on board that first ship, so to speak?
Well, a great question. I think my first aspiration was to travel. My second aspiration was to get into a job or get into a career or an environment that was meaningful, that had a sense of purpose, that had a sense of fun. And that and that became very obvious that the Navy had that and a lot more as a military organisation. So I very soon found myself belonging to an organisation that had very clear values, that was providing a service to the country, was doing what was right. So that's at the strategic level, if you like. At the tactical level, around Bob Sanguinetti, what did it feel like? Well, it felt very much like I was a part of a close knit team. There was a very strong sense of identity, very proud, a strong sense of purpose, and I think the desire to get things done, do things properly, and be committed to the service, be committed to the organisation, and that manifests itself very clearly when you're on a ship, which might have 50 people, or it might have 500, 600 people, all wearing the same uniform, all wearing the same cap tally, and all striving towards a common purpose, which is very clearly defined by the objectives set by the organisation or set by the commanding officer of that particular unit. And that followed me right the way through my career, spanning almost 3 decades. So, there was never a dull moment. There was never any doubt as to what it was we were trying to achieve. And crucially, something that I've kept with me throughout my entire working career is the importance of the individual, and making sure that the individual understands what the unit, the organisation, the ship is trying to achieve, and what the role of the individual is within that, and how they can best contribute towards the outcomes that you're trying to achieve as an organisation or as a ship at sea.
And that's a great answer, because it leads us into that personal trait. We're asking our guests about their personal trait and what they hold with us. I've been lucky enough to meet you a few times socially as well as in business, but that inclusion in your vision is very clear. You communicate that very well. Do you feel that's something that has developed as you've gone through from the Navy, then into the private sector, then where you're at? You've always been able to carry that vision and mission and communicate it with your team, because as an outsider, the port seems to communicate where it's going way better than it's ever done before, and that's largely down to you. But you will always say it's part of a wider team. How do you feel about that? Is that a strong trait? Is that a trait that you feel core to you?
I think so. I think so. What I say to whenever I'm asked to give advice, or I'm privileged to give advice to youngsters on careers and so on, the things I say, and I've shared this with my daughters. To what extent they've listened to me or not, I don't know. But what I say is, when you're stepping into a role, the two things that stand out among others. The first one is, you need to have a purpose. Why are you doing it? What is the organisation doing? Why is the organisation doing it? But at the individual level, you need to have a sense of purpose. I'm doing this because I love the area that I'm going into, or I'm doing it because as a means to another end, and I need to get this bit of training done, or I need to get this experience. But you need to have something that will get you out of bed in the mornings to go into work. So you need to have that sense of purpose. And the second one is, you need to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, you can have all the purpose in the world, but if you really do not enjoy it, you're not going to leap out of bed in the mornings to want to do that. So you need those two things, and that applies as much in the military as anywhere else. And it applies to the individual, and it applies to the organisation or the company that the individual is joining. And I saw that very clearly when I first came to Aberdeen, and I met with my predecessor, and I saw the massive construction site, as it was then, of South Harbour. But I also saw it in I think that the backdrop that was beginning to take shape in terms of energy transition, that the notion that oil and gas is not going to be around forever. If oil and gas accounts for over 50% of the revenue of the port, and the port wants to be around in 50 years' time, it's going to be thinking about what else is it going to be doing over the next 50 years. So that shift from oil and gas to renewables and that diversification, you don't need more clarity of purpose than that in order to excite yourself about working in the Port of Aberdeen and how you can play a part, as big or as small, in shaping Port of Aberdeen, so that in 50 years' time, when we've gone beyond our 900-year-long history, it still has a bright future, and you're not simply managing decline because we've chosen to stick to something we've done very well for the last 50 years, but something that's coming to an end. So the same principles of purpose and of enjoyment apply in this as it does in any other walk of life.
I think we sometimes lose sight of that. I was speaking to a friend the other day, and it was a social thing, and he went, "I don't want to go along to this because it won't make me happy. I'm doing the right thing by attending it, but actually it's not going to make me happy." So there was a balance there. And by talking it out loud, because Scotsmen of a certain age don't talk about those things on a very regular basis, I sat there and went, actually, that's right. I don't want to go cartwheeling through life. It'd be great if I could, but the purpose and the fun element is really key. You're talking about, 900 years is a phenomenal age, is a phenomenal time span in anything, but looking forward to the next 50. And we're a technology company, as you know. As you've travelled, have you been on your travels through life and through business? If we can talk about technology just for a moment, what piece of technology has affected you in your role, or will affect you, you see, in your role, in terms of work and life, that you can say, I couldn't do without that now, or it's been game changing for me?
Gosh, that's a really, really difficult question. I think I'd start by saying that in the military, you have access to, you're lucky enough to have access to leading edge technology because of the investment that governments make in technology to make sure that you're one step ahead of your potential adversary. I recall the very, very early days of GPS, and the fascination that you could have a little bit of kit with an antenna plugged onto your mast in the middle of the ocean, and you know exactly where you were, to within, in those days, an accuracy of a couple of 100 meters, whereas now clearly it's much more accurate. I do have a story, but we probably haven't got time for it, of being given that capability and then having it taken away overnight and having to go back to the basics of astronavigation, so navigation by stars and by the sun and so on. So we kept those skills going. But I think, to come back to your question, if it's one aspect of technology that's changed our lives beyond everything else, it's got to be communications, and it's got to be the arrival of the internet and global communications and access to all. I remember the days, and again, to bring this to life with reality, I remember the days when I was first at sea, and the only means of communications with your loved ones at home was by hard copy letter, by bluey, as they're called in the military. And you'd have to number the envelopes sequentially to make sure that they were read in the right sequence, because you never knew when they were going to arrive, and they'd arrive invariably, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or sometimes even longer after they'd been written and sent. And there was no, clearly, international phone calls were only for emergencies and by exception. And if you were ashore in a foreign port, you'd queue up along with everyone else next to a bank of phone boxes with a bag full of local coins, and hope that the person you were phoning was there when your turn was up. And if not, then you had a bit more money to go and spend on beer or something else, and wait for another day for a phone call. Whereas now, it's you type things up, you're on Wi-Fi, you've got broadband, you've got satellite connectivity, and so on. So I think, from a personal perspective, communications but also from a professional perspective, communications as well, because you now have a much better understanding of what's going on everywhere around you, whether it's through access to media or whether it's in the military, in my case, access to information intelligence, almost real time in a way that didn't exist in the past.
You completely forget about GPS. We used to drive to France with the kids camping every year, and we used maps. We had the AA or the RSA A3 map in the car, and when we try and relate that back to other people now, they go, "So why do you not use your phone?" Well, we didn't have one. So, but
Yeah,
the GPS, that transition into the communications era, and if everything is available all the time, it's how you use it. I suppose back
yeah,
to your purpose. What's the purpose of picking up this app or using this? It's got to have that purpose. Good answer, great answer. I love that. It's very specific, and I like that one. So we're coming to the end. The tide has risen, and the ship is about to sail. We're coming to the end of our time here, and thank you very much for joining us. As always, we do 4 quick fire questions. And just before we go, so Bob, D side or C side?
ooh, 50-50.
Oh, come on. Okay. That on
Okay,
your
okay,
bike or taking
okay.
it.
Well, I tell you what, because my pastime now is predominantly cycling. It's got to be D
Yeah.
side.
Well, that leads us straight into the second question. On your bike or taking a hike? That's an
On
obvious
my bike,
answer, isn't it?
on my bike,
Obviously.
because I cover more ground.
Okay. Very local. Benahee or Ben the Hoose, if you've heard that expression.
Benahi,
Fantastic. And the question we ask all our guests, buttery or fine piece?
buttery, but not too often.
Otherwise, it has an effect on the bike. Bob, that's been
Right.
fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. We've really enjoyed the conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Graham. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.